So I just got back from the Slavoj Zizek Jordan Peterson debate, and not only do they agree on political correctness, but they were agreeing with each other extremely broadly on almost everything that falls under the culture war rubric. And it would appear that they might become good buddies, which sounds like a funny thing to say, but they got along extraordinarily well into the second half of the debate, and it really changed from it kind of stopped being a debate very quickly and turned into a extremely constructive sort of dialogue of the kind of which that you're probably used to seeing on a really good podcast or something like that. So I know that this debate was framed as a kind of another one of those culture war conflicts where it's supposed to be about something specific, but kind of ends up turning into an argument about almost everything that is involved in the political conflicts that we're experiencing these days. And so I guess the expectation from a lot of people on the left, and I understand that people, see that as an amorphous term or whatever, but I'm just talking about, fans of Chapo Trap House podcast, people who hate the IDW for a very varied number of reasons. And of course, not all of them like Zizek, but so many of them were counting on Zizek to kind of nail Peterson or whatever. And it did turn into one of those broader culture war conversations, but it wasn't an argument. They really agreed with each other on almost everything. Interestingly, Zizek conceded to Peterson that the sort of fundamental Marxist revolutionary program was actually an evil thing, and that the simplistic kind of class distinction where you have the binary of the evil bourgeoisie who are always oppressing the fundamentally benevolent proletariat. Interestingly, he even agrees with Jordan Peterson's sort of Cain and Abel, the evil of envy explanation of why it is that dichotomy is so bad and led to the horrors of places like Mao's China and the Soviet Union. So now Zizek is really more interested in complicated critiques of capitalism, things like how the profit motive can inevitably end up neglecting certain moral concerns, or how the advertising industry tries to sort of turn people into hyper-consumerist actors who lose their ability to value things outside of the commodification of things that happens in capitalism, which are real things. And of course, I don't think that means that we need to get rid of capitalism. What I really think that means is that we need to learn how to view capitalism in a much more utilitarian way as this is how we run our economy, and be very careful about allowing capitalist thinking to become too deeply involved with the way that we really make meaning for ourselves and what we determine to be especially valuable. Of course, Zizek is not a revolutionary anyway, so I'm just really going to be talking about the kind of culture war implications of this debate mostly, because after a certain point, they got into very deep conversations that were about topics about happiness and sort of the limitation on even conceptualizing the purpose of life as being the pursuit of happiness. Things about, well, interestingly, Zizek and Peterson were agreeing a lot about the value of the concept of grace in Christianity, as well as the idea that the fall is this fundamental precondition to the idea of the good being able to exist, which was something that Zizek brought up, but I guess it's a Hegelian idea from him, but Jordan Peterson's Jungian perspective obviously completely meshed with that perfectly. And so they had part of me was so interested in the culture war implications of their agreement that I kept tabulating, oh, they're agreeing on this, they're agreeing on this. And I'm going to go watch the debate again because it was amazing. And it's not really a debate, but whatever. I'm going to go watch it again and sort of not think about that and just process it as a very interesting, deep, meaningful conversation. And I'll say the interesting culture war implications for you so that if you end up going and watching the debate for yourselves, you don't have to be thinking in that way either. It was so cool because I'm actually personally not a very big fan of debate, although I am a free speech absolutist, which sounds quite strange. But, there's this kind of idea, which is, if you can't debate, then all that's left to do is have violent conflict. But even more than that, if you can't have a constructive dialogue, then you're kind of stuck with this pathological conversation form, which is a debate. And the problem with debate is that it frames conversations in a highly adversarial way and ties people's ego into the outcome of the conversation in a way which really fucks with it. Essentially, the problem that you always encounter is that, or almost always encounter, is that people start prioritizing winning the debate or coming out looking like they're right over a collective pursuit of the truth. If anyone's ever watched any debates on Destiny's channel, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Because those Destiny debates are almost invariably complete fucking shit shows, incredibly painful to watch, and also nearly entirely non-productive. So what happened with Peterson and Zizek was, at a certain point, the two of them, and very early on actually, were able to transcend the framing of the debate and both sort of take a step back and look at the question, which is, capitalism versus Marxism, what's the best route to happiness or whatever, and say, really, like, what do we, as two people, think about this question in general, and then having a dialogue around that. So that was really amazing. It was the transcendence of the debate, I think, is an amazing thing. So I really like to look around on different subreddits for different sort of political leanings, because I'm kind of obsessed with kind of keeping my fingers on the zeitgeist and everything. So I look at the BreadTube, which is funnily enough, the name for the far left YouTube people. I would call it a breadline tube, but whatever. There's the Chapo Trap House subreddit, which are fans of this like very far left leaning podcast. And then I look at the IDW subreddit and Jordan Peterson subreddits and stuff like that. And so the crazy shit that's happening right now, and I always try to maintain a slight relativist kind of view, although I'm not like fundamentally that way, just because I always want to be in the mode where I can really consider what people are thinking. I try to avoid getting into the mental mode of thinking, well, these people are just stupid and like forget them. But this situation's really testing that for me, because I already said how constructive the conversation was and how it actually stopped being a debate very early on. And I can't give a good argument for that because it's just so insanely obvious to me. And it's one of those things where you go and see for yourself. And so if I'm an idiot for saying this, I don't care, frankly, but I'm definitely not wrong in this. And this is the opinion that is reflected when I read on the Jordan Peterson subreddits and the IDW subreddits. As I said before, reading about the sort of coming up to the event, it was the same sort of thing where on the Peterson subreddit, people were very balanced and just sort of not expecting anything in particular, mostly interested in waiting and seeing. Whereas on the left-wing subreddits and so on, everybody was very much anticipating a destruction of Jordan Peterson by Zizek. So strange, man. So I go over to the Chapo Trap House subreddit, and almost literally everybody there thinks that Zizek won the debate and basically mopped the floor with Peterson. It's loaded with insulting comments and people making fun of Peterson for his like sort of simplistic criticism of the Marxist revolutionary program, even though it ended up being the case that Zizek basically agreed with him on all of it, and the all that Zizek had to say about Marxism was, some of the accurate criticisms of capitalism. Nothing at all about an actual communist program. So I was in the audience, and very early on in Peterson's introductory statement, some fucking idiot in the audience stands up and just yells, "You're literally the stupidest person who's ever existed," or something of that nature. And there's a few other hecklers and a couple of bouts of condescending laughter. Of course, I don't want to make it out so it sounds like Peterson was essentially just getting heckled through the whole thing, but it was kind of close to that. It was really fucking bad. And what's so amazing to me is that, okay, so you really think Peterson's an idiot. Well, he happens to be on the stage with a Marxist philosopher who I would assume you think would be sympathetic to your viewpoint. So why not just wait until it's his turn so that he could go and then explain it. Are you really so narcissistic that you think that you just yelling "you're an idiot" out of the crowd is going to make him look stupider? And you saw nothing at all of this from the Peterson crowd. So if you're really trying to make some kind of statement, well, statement made, but the statement is that the left-leaning people who hate Peterson are fucking retarded and don't know how to kind of respectfully watch a discussion and allow the people who they paid to have the discussion to do it. It was really ridiculous. But the funny thing is, and this is sort of where the victory comes, is that later in the debate, when the massive agreement started happening, these sorts of people, you could see there were streams of them walking out of the theater as they slowly realize, Zizek's not actually in it to own Peterson and is agreeing with him on all kinds of stuff, most especially about the problem of social justice warriors and like the kind of postmodern radicals who are in academia and the media and stuff like that. So it was extremely funny after this opening bullshit to see all these salty communists. Well, I won't use the word communist because I know it's complicated, but I'll say these like salty postmodern radicals walking out of the debate all disappointed. Is very funny. So one of the most interesting parts of this debate with regards to the culture war was when Zizek brings up this whole issue of postmodern neo-Marxism, which of course is one of the most fundamental pillars of the general critique against Peterson because of this whole idea, well, he's conflating postmodernism and Marxism, he doesn't understand Marxism, he doesn't understand postmodernism. It's, in my opinion, an extremely nitpicky debate and really misses the point, because the people who he's talking about when he says postmodern neo-Marxism most certainly exist, and that really is the fundamental problem, which gets kind of pushed aside and ignored by this essentially semantic argument. I'd really like to make a debate about this topic on a more broad sense because I have a lot to say about it. But let's just have Zizek, in here.
I'm asking you now, not read more, I don't advise you, but give me some names and so on, and who are these postmodern, egalitarian, neo-Marxists, and where do you see any kind even of Marxism? I see in it mostly an impotent, an utterly impotent moralization. Please, I'm so sorry that I was too
No, that's no problem.
Please.
Well, I mean, organization like Jonathan Haidt's, what's it called? Heterodox Academy, and other organizations like that have documented an absolute dearth of conservative voices in the social sciences and the humanities, and about 25%, according to the what I think are reliable surveys, approximately 25% of social scientists in the US identify themselves as Marxists. And so there's that.
But where are the
Well,
results?
okay, but
Can you name me one?
To
I know a couple of Marxists. For example, who does very solid economic work.
Yeah.
I don't totally. David Harvey, one. But he writes very serious books of economic analysis and so on and so on. Then there is the old guy who is far from simplification, Frederick Jameson and so on. But they are totally marginalized today. In this politically correct mainstream, I don't see.
Well, yeah, your question seemed to me to focus more on the peculiar relationship that I've noticed and that people have disputed between postmodernism and neo-Marxism. And I see the connection between the postmodernist types and the Marxists as a sleight of hand that replaced the notion of the oppression of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie as the oppression by one identity group by another.
Totally agree with you.
Okay, so now look, we could
But
have
that's precisely a non-Marxist gesture.
Totally agree with you. Oh, get fucking cucked, postmodern neo-Marxists. But okay, so I'm not gonna get out of control with this because of course Zizek sees this transformation, which he agrees happened, as a fundamentally non-Marxist thing to do. So it's not as though, I guess he still disagrees with the fact that this although it is kind of a neo-Marxist thing in a strange way, he doesn't like the fact that this term is used to demonize Marxists. But the real heart of this, and this comes up multiple times later on in the debate, is that the people who Peterson is referring to when he says postmodern neo-Marxists fundamentally exist, and Zizek agrees. Furthermore, they both agree almost completely about why it is and the fact that those people are such a big problem. So the crazy thing about this, if you go on like on the Chapo forums, it's people pointing to Zizek finally owning Peterson because he didn't end up bringing up any particular postmodern neo-Marxist authors to refer to. But it doesn't really matter, because the argument about the sorts of people who are postmodern neo-Marxists is like so insanely obvious, he could just state it. Zizek agreed with him, so what's the fucking point? These people, I'm going to say this, if you ever see people arguing about like the existence of postmodern neo-Marxism or whatever it is, it's just a semantic argument. It's like completely non-substantial with regards to whether or not this sort of strange ideology actually exists or not. So it's safe to mostly ignore people like this. I'm gonna talk about this in another video because it really is a big and quite a good topic. But yeah, man, so they fucking agree. So I get to watch all these salty postmodern neo-Marxists leaving the debate once they start to realize, like, oh, Zizek isn't going to destroy Peterson. Oh no. I think we'll start to see some kind of admitting that this is going on the internet in the next week or so. And I'm definitely looking forward to Peterson and Zizek talking again, because I'm almost certain that they will, because it's pretty badass. And yeah, maybe Zizek will get to expose his ideas to some of us, and good for them, good for him. So there's not much else to say. Looking at a lot of the commentary coming from the left about this, there's a lot of people thinking that Peterson was walking back a lot of his positions throughout the debate because his opening statement was so sort of vehemently anti-Marxist, what would you call it? Marxist revolutionary program. But the first thing is they're all ignoring the fact that Zizek is also against the Marxist revolutionary program. I don't think that can be stated enough. But furthermore, it's just Peterson didn't walk from the perspective of one of the fucking nerds who's watched hours and hours and hours of his stuff. I wasn't surprised by any of the things that he said as it progressed. I think it's just that they've been so exposed to such a sort of hyper-partisan framing of Peterson's beliefs that as he starts to elaborate on what he actually thinks, they become confused and they think, oh, he must be walking himself back. But it's actually, no, he just never was as extreme as you ever thought he was. So I guess the last thing you could say about Peterson's stated views on Marxism is that there's not a proper bridging of the gap between sort of Marxist philosophy and the more rational sort of market-limiting practices that we commonly have in our societies, or sort of different sort of reasonable redistributionist policies. And this makes a certain amount of sense because of how insanely dangerous Marxism can be when it's taken to its extreme, which is something that both Peterson and Zizek agree on. But maybe it's kind of non-integral in that he's sort of failing to face the fact that the thing with Marxism is that he was one of the first very serious critics of capitalism, and we happen to live in a highly capitalist economy, so we can't get around the need to criticize it. It's a necessity. And the fact that one of the first people to do it was Marx means that a lot of the very important ideas happen to come from the same guy. And so we have to sort of suck it up and deal with the fact that the same doctrine that caused so many deaths in the 20th century comes from the same source as a lot of the kind of maybe important rational criticisms of capitalism that we have. The only thing is that although there is a clear distinction between these sort of insane revolutionary doctrine and the rational, deep, and necessary criticisms of capitalism, it's also the case that like these groups of people don't really differentiate each other very much within the social circles and academic circles that they work in. And so Peterson's criticism that the left has not done a proper job of demarking what really constitutes like the ultimately pathological and dangerous left is very true. And so I actually think that that is a much bigger problem and more pathological problem than the fact that Peterson is kind of like blanket disavowing Marxism in the way that he is, although perhaps he could improve on that in the future. So that's all I have to say. Hope you found that interesting. This one's a bit more casual. I just wanted to give my thoughts on the debate, which again I really can't recommend enough. It was extremely interesting, a very exciting meeting of the minds under kind of uncertain circumstances where it wasn't that obvious how intense the disagreement might get. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, I'll be coming out with a lot more in the coming weeks. You know, they'll keep coming out. So definitely subscribe to the channel if you're interested. And thanks a lot for watching. I really appreciate it. So take care.